people who set it up did their job well because it was supposed to be classified from the very beginning. Anything that gets over 60 years old tends to break down. And then you have one incident, and it's remembered in the history books forever. We have a real failure to communicate between the government, the Department of Justice, the NRC, and the watchdog groups and the citizens who have to live there.
Well, why shouldn't we?
You shouldn't.
Why?
You can't.
Why?
Because a lot of the things that happened were classified, and therefore they're things they're not just never going to tell you.
Stief zeigt dem Historiker Paul DeRienzo ein paar Fundstücke.
357 Magnum.
Eine Kaliber 57 Magnum.
Die Kugel steckt noch im Lauf.
And a 9mm.
Und ein 9 mm Revolver mit Handschellen.
Refugees from Germany who had come to the United States therefore believed that Germany might actually be able to produce a bomb before the United States could.
Author and journalist Paul DeRienzo says Amnesty's assessment of aspects of U.S. foreign policy are right on target.
The United States, while quick to condemn other countries for their violations, gloss over what was happening in places like Egypt and Tunisia.
Egypt is a in many ways, very westernized country, but in many other ways also a very traditional country, and these type of divisions and splits are coming out.
Do you agree that this is a good step?
Of course, it's a step that was a long time in coming. The reactor has been in operation since 1969. As one activist said, it's sort of like driving a 1960s car when everybody's zipping around in Teslas today. It was really sold to them as a great technological achievement and not as a destructive weapon, and they didn't know until much later.
It's got to go someplace anyway.
Yes.
So why not just store it where it is?
Right, that's what they don't want to do. That's what the public doesn't want to have happen. Transuranic waste is supposed to go to the waste isolation pilot plant in southeastern New Mexico. It would be trucked down there and buried about 2,500 feet under the ground in a salt mine. That salt mine has already had tremendous accidents. There was a drum of waste from Los Alamos that was improperly packed and exploded. At that point, there was a desire to drop the bomb either as to send a message to the Soviet Union at that time, which was the other victor in the war and would soon be involved with the U.S. in the Cold War. It was the most expensive project ever undertaken in American history. Billions of dollars in today's money was spent, and there might have been an investigation that this was some sort of boondoggle.
Hi, this is Paul DeRienzo, and welcome to Let Them Talk, our special coronavirus version of the show. This is the COVID days of near lockdown, if not quite lockdown. I mean, I go on the streets of New York, and I don't see really a lockdown, but in the subways, it definitely is quiet. I'm glad to see most New Yorkers are wearing their masks, although I know even friends of mine who are rebelling against the whole mask idea that this COVID is just some made-up imagined threat that the government and the deep state are using to take away our freedoms. Well, I tell you something, death has a way of taking away your freedom too. And so I'll risk the deep state before I'll risk a little known virus that can come into my life and not only put people on ventilators, but even if they survive it, even if they have mild symptoms, they can lose their sense of smell, lose their sense of taste, have heart disease, lung damage. All these things that they're just discovering can be caused by this pernicious little bug. Now, as far as what's happening with the vaccine, you know, I listen a lot to, people who are well versed in alternative healing and health, and they said that this has been the purpose of this whole disease from day one is just to hook people onto this vaccine. The vaccine would then, make Pfizer and all these companies billionaires, and the government would profit in its own way from controlling people and making people do something they might not want to do. I don't know, really. I see that, but science is really our guide star in all of this. I don't know about this. I understand people fear the government and the vaccine and what it means to have millions and hundreds of millions, and if this vaccine spreads around the world, billions of people injected by a central authority with a chemical that they know about better than all the people who are receiving it. I can see the fear that's involved in that. I don't know if it's really the scientists, the virus, or the vaccine that are the problem as the lack of faith that people have in their leaders that comes from generations of being lied to by your leaders and horrendous, useless wars that have sent so many home in boxes and bags. So I can understand how people might have a distrust, a bitter distrust. Yesterday was the 57th anniversary of the JFK assassination, the granddaddy of all great modern conspiracy theories, the one that I think is actually accurate. And I can understand how people who lived through that period, who are still around, like myself, I was 6 years old at the time, know that John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, was shot under the most unusual of circumstances that have not been fully explained to this very day. In fact, they managed to come up with the Warren Commission report, a whole wall of books that were supposed to tell us that it was 3 bullets were fired, that 1 bullet shattered, that 1 bullet there was a single bullet that struck Kennedy and Governor Connolly, the single bullet theory, and that it came from the 6th floor window of the book depository, and a person who just happened to be working in that school book depository had been visiting the Russian consulate in Mexico City, had lived in Russia, and had been a Marine and had associations with people like David Ferry and others who were involved in right-wing anti-Castro, anti-Cuba activities while he was in the Fair Play for Cuba committee. So, he was allegedly giving out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans, and there was an altercation, and it was put on television, and that was supposed to show his communist bona fides, and then there was an attempt to sort of stick the Russians, I guess, with this idea that they were behind the assassination. Then you have Roger Stone, who says it was LBJ, but he hates Democrats in general, being a loyal Republican with Nixon's face tattooed on his back. I have always looked at this as they've never been able to explain to me so many details when I talk to people who were there. I've talked to people who were there in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, and they had military experience. They were World War II veterans, and they tell me that there was a fuselage of gunfire. There wasn't just 3 bullets, that were fired, and it wasn't just 1 bullet, the magic bullet that shot these 2 men because one happened to turn in the direction of the other. That was the theory that was first put forward, and you can see it on C-SPAN actually and listen to it. That's where I was listening to it. That theory was first put forward, I think, on November 25th in a telephone conversation that was recorded between the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had just become president. The theory, long before the Warren Commission was published, you had this sort of dastardly head of the FBI, the infamous J. Edgar Hoover, telling people what the theory was already, just a couple of days after, that somehow he turned at the wrong moment and the bullet struck both of them. I'm more of a follower. I think Fletcher Prouty, his point of view, he was actually in the military and he was onto it, and he was they tried to get rid of him, to send him to Antarctica, all these kind of things. I've always believed there was a hit job. Who was behind the hit job? The FBI, the mafia, they were all working together, weren't they, in those days? So maybe it was both of them. So anyway, coming out of the Kennedy assassination and what the government went through in order to try and convince people, and how they just were not convinced that that was true, that it was a single gunman, a single bullet theory, that it was one lone gunman. Nobody believed that. And even today, the government's constantly talking about they're worrying about lone actors. Well, I don't think that these fascist organizations that are in the military, in the police, that are organizing these rallies where they're threatening the governors of the state of Michigan, for example, and others, are the result of lone, or the fear is that we're going to have a lone actor. These are absolutely organized right-wing movements. And Donald Trump, you can see by what's happening with him now. Excuse me. You can see with what's happening with Donald Trump now, the way he's fighting the fact that he lost this election, fair and square and clear. Okay, maybe if it had been less than 1,000 votes. I mean, he won by just a few thousand votes. Okay, so the Kennedy assassination, now we're talking about Donald Trump and these people who are out there supporting his attempt to overturn a democratic election in the United States. And that's not to, I'm not saying that I think that anything different is going to really come from, as far as policy of the United States government because of a Biden administration rule. That's not what it's about. It's about that Donald Trump was obviously in bed and spearheading a fascist movement. That doesn't mean the goals are different. It's the means to get to those goals that make a fascist different than a Democrat. The problem with fascists and, America Firsters has always been not that the policy so much differed, but that they felt that demonstrators and people using free speech and the Constitution in order to voice their opposition to, let's say, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan were the problem, right? That's what they want to do. The existence of these right-wing groups and of this America First movement is fundamentally to silence opposition and protest. It's not really to change the policy so much, right? And that makes it hard because people say, well, Trump said he wanted to pull out the troops, but really he's not pulling out the troops, is he? Now he is, supposedly. We'll see if that happens or not, but it never really happened. And what he really seems to be wanting to do is to hand some sort of defeat to Joe Biden, to mess up Joe Biden's transition out of vindictiveness in large part, I think. But also because he had a plan. If he had won, we would have seen a seizure of power, I think, like never been seen in this country before, that was stymied by the loss and put Trump and his followers on the defensive, which is very good. I think that's a positive outcome, and it shows the power of people in the streets. We should follow through on this to the degree possible. At the same time, understand that it's not the policies you're going to see from Biden aren't going to be all that different in a lot of ways. All right, he might put more focus on urban centers because he got so many votes from urban centers, but his foreign policy might not be as different as you think it is. So the fascists, the people who supported Trump, I mean, look at Trump. One of the first things he's trying to do now in this period of this 60 days he has now until January 20th is to speed up executions. That should tell you something. What is this guy about? He's about executing people. That was always the America First. You're coddling criminals. You're letting people have, back in the day when America was great, what happened? Somebody committed a crime. They were convicted, a murder, let's say. They were taken out within a week and they were hung. That was it. Execution was quick. Appeals were perfunctory. Right? This is the big change in American society, is that they've either gotten rid of the death penalty, or in places where they still have it, the people languish on death row for years, decades sometimes, because they have so many appeals. You have Trump and his people, they want to speed up the process of executing people. All right? Now, imagine that, expanded, right? All of a sudden, people are being executed left and right, right? For what? We don't know what, right? So fascism, difference between fascism and a non-fascist, just your general capitalist corrupt government, right? They're going to push things through. They're going to eliminate the opposition. They're going to execute people. They're going to use the Justice Department to go after the enemies of the leader, the fearless leader, the person in charge. They're going to try and raise a generation of people who believe that one person, Donald Trump, has all the answers, and that anybody who's against him is against solving the problems. And what are the problems in our society, right? People who are not English-speaking, white Euro people, right? Not that they're the problem, but that that is, he's selling that wolf ticket. They've been selling those wolf tickets to the public for a long time, and it's built into a system where slavery existed. We had slavery in this society for so many hundreds of years, and then followed by Jim Crow, even after a period of Reconstruction, right? And the white working class was often brainwashed with the idea that they were in competition with black people for jobs and labor, especially since the unions, wouldn't allow, many of the unions wouldn't allow black people to become members of them. So they were sort of an other that was often at odds with the white working class from the early days on. And even in the earlier slave days, it's weird. The non-slave owning white poor people of the southern areas who were not slave owners themselves, who were dirt poor, actually sometimes had envy for the slave who it was property and had to be cared for, and so there might be a medical program for the slaves, but the person who's living in a shack, trying to till a small piece of land and survive poorly has nothing, right? So there was these kind of differences that created at the heart of the white supremacy. So. And Trump is like latching right onto it. I think it's sort of interesting though that there is sort of like a black people for Trump, small tiny minority, mostly men, right? And taking advantage of the differences between men and women and sexism that's in our society. And ultimately it was black women who made the difference and got Biden elected. I think that's interesting, something we have to study more carefully. This guy, Trump, and his attempt to overturn a democratic election is representative of a fascist coup, an attempt at a fascist coup that would have happened if Biden hadn't won the election. And so is this going to go away? I doubt it. This is not going to go away just because Trump is out. We haven't even really gotten Trump out there. He's still 60 days and he's playing every game he can in order to stay. And he's trying to damage things as much as he can, which shows, if they're about America first, then why are they damaging America to the extent that they can? They're trying to hurt Biden's ability to set up a new government. And the transition is such a key element of a change in government because, we don't know all the things that are going on there. Presidents are judged by what we don't know about them, right? The emergencies and the crises that we didn't hear about, is what makes a president a pretty good president, right? We didn't hear about it, not because he kept it a secret, that too happens, but because they solved it before it became an issue, right? Imagine if they had been on top of COVID and solved it, before it came to America, if they had got together with the World Health Organization and had decent relations with the Chinese, and they had actually put the lid on the pandemic before it broke out, then we wouldn't even hear about it, right? It would be just something that faded, like the Ebola scare a few years earlier. It just came and went. Or SARS, it was just a small pinprick compared to what we're seeing now. We wouldn't even have heard about it. Imagine, I'm not being funny here, but imagine the asteroids coming to the Earth. We don't know about it. They're going to panic people, right? The president has no transition. He doesn't know that the asteroids come until the day he walks into the office. He should be knowing about that now. It could be the difference between the asteroid hitting us and being moved by a satellite or something. You think I'm joking? Truman came to be president when FDR had a sudden heart attack and died, and when he walked into the White House is the first time he ever heard of the atomic bomb project. He had no idea. He didn't really even decide. When the first atomic bombs were dropped in Hiroshima, probably Nagasaki as well, the President of the United States was so unawares and had no knowledge of what was going on that the military really made the decision to drop those bombs. And it was only later that the president made dropping the atomic bomb, a presidential prerogative, which at the time was sort of a good idea because they didn't want the military to be dropping the atomic bomb, right? But now we have a crazy person like Trump with his finger on the nuclear trigger. So now we want a committee. There should be a committee to drop the bomb. You should not have one person allowed to push that button and drop the bomb. There's no need for it. It's not necessary. And I think that we have to be really careful about that. We have a president who's not stable, who is capable of anything. He's capable of anything. So will he use his power to unilaterally launch a nuclear war? He can. Donald Trump can. He has that power. All right. Why do you think people are worried? That's why people are worried. Right. And here's a man who's pushed. He doesn't like to lose. He's backs against the wall. There's nothing more dangerous than a cornered, desperate human being. You know, nothing more dangerous. And here he is. He has that power to launch a nuclear holocaust. He doesn't. Nobody can say no. Nobody can veto his choice. It's his decision alone to make. And that came about because Truman, when he walked in, was told about the atomic bomb briefly, just a short number of weeks before it was dropped. He knew nothing about it, had no idea of the science or what its power was, and the military just already had it under their purview, and they just went along with it. It was like a bowling ball rolling down the aisle. There's no way to stop it. So Truman believed after that should never be allowed again. That the president should have the sole power. Think about that. The president, actually, that was considered the more rational idea, because you wanted a civilian leader who wasn't wed to the war to make the decision. But that idea has now, the reality has changed. So now we have to worry about one Caligula or Nero type figure in the White House taking out his angst against the world with his nuclear power. Now maybe it's time to talk about that. Remember, Nixon was very much having a nervous breakdown when he was facing impeachment, and he had really turned to the bottle, and he was drunk. He was drunk as a skunk, drunk as a skunk. And here was a man who had that sole power to launch a nuclear war. Trying to get Henry Kissinger to pray to pictures of the presidents in the hallway, and the Kissinger's going along with it, thinking this guy's nuts, because he was afraid of upsetting a man who had that much power and who was that depressed and that drunk. And we've had other presidents who were big drinkers, and we all know. I mean, everybody loves a tipple, a little bit, but we all know when you go over a certain, when people go too far with their drinking, the emotions rule, and they could do anything. They have no inhibitions have been destroyed. Anything is possible. And so you have a drunken president. Oh my God. And it brings me back to Kennedy. Interesting guy, John F. Kennedy. I had here one of the guests on and talked about Kennedy's, one of his many lovers, but I think the one he was his most favorite lover was Mary Myers. Mary Myers was the descendant of a very wealthy family that were involved in setting up the national park system in the United States. She lived in Georgetown, had her home, the backyard of her brownstone abutted the backyard of the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, Ben Bradley. She was part of a scene around Timothy Leary and hung out with Timothy Leary, taking LSD. And she, as the story goes, visited the White House as a lover of Jack Kennedy and shared marijuana with him and LSD, the story goes. And there's a story that she and him smoked a joint, and he got the munchies and went down to the refrigerator and came up with all this food and spread it out on the bed where they were staying. And she offered him another one, and he said, I'm afraid what would happen if the Russians attacked. I want to take another one, although this is very nice. And it's said that he took LSD and became a believer, like LSD usually does to people, in world peace. They've done tests to show that taking LSD actually makes people more liberal, which might be one of the reasons the government was so against it. And she believed that she could get him to take LSD, that he would become a proponent like her of world peace. And so she made it her. She went to Tim Leary to get a dose of LSD to bring to the White House. And allegedly he took it, but we don't really know, right? It's in the mists of history. She had kept a diary, Mary Meyer, and when she died 1 year, almost 1 year to the date, October of 1964. She was jogging along the towpath of the C&O Canal in Georgetown, and somebody came up to her and shot her in the head one time, I think. And then they arrested somebody, you know, the black guy, and he had a great lawyer, and it turned out that he was innocent. He was found not guilty, and so the crime to this day is unsolved. But when Ben Bradley saw her body and the police around her and realized what had happened, he ran to his home and ran through the front door and out the back to get into her house in order to procure her diaries. And when he walked in, he saw coming out the back door James Jesus Angleton, who was one of the key figures in the CIA at that time. And he already had in his hands the diaries. So, and I think they got the diaries back in the end, but, you know, we don't know what parts were kept and destroyed. And so she had kept diaries that were in the hands of the CIA. So right after her body was still warm. She was lying, bleeding out on the towpath, and the CIA was already in her house. The top CIA officials were already in her house. So, you know, what she knew, we'll never know, right? And why she had to be taken out as a witness. Many of the witnesses in the Kennedy assassination were taken out. So no wonder people are fearful of the government and don't want to do things the government says they should do, like take a vaccine in order to stop the spread of this pernicious disease that's causing so many problems. And I would say stay alert, but don't just write it off as something you won't do, because don't we want to get past this? Don't we want to get past this? It's time to get past this. We need to get past this. And if modern science can get us past this, why would we ignore it? You know, you just have to be alert and aware, but that doesn't mean we have to just pull into our shelters and cover our heads like a turtle, you know, like a tortoise, or like an ostrich with our heads in the sand. You know, we have to, if there's actions we can take, we must and we should take them. Anyway, I'm Paul DeRienzo, and this has been Let Them Talk. Thanks a lot for joining us, and I'll see you next week.